session. Thank you very much for having me. This is really such a good event. I first made contact with Steve and Bardry, the organisers of the local user group, maybe just before Christmas, not too long before Christmas, looking for opportunities for our user group in Perth to sort of build connections with other user groups elsewhere. We'd already started doing this with some of the other state user groups in Australia. We sort of flew some people in to do some presentations for us. And within a week or two of initially making contact, this event was publicised, and I thought it was a no-brainer, so thank you very much everyone for having me. Just a little bit about me, the Chief Security and Technology Officer for Journey One, which is a Perth-based consultancy, advanced AWS partner. I'm an AWS ambassador, AWS Community builder, and I think, as I just mentioned, a leader in the AWS Perth user group. I've got many interests in many things, and definitely a discussion for another day. So, we're here to talk about AWS pain points. The initial version of this presentation, I proceeded with a survey to the Perth user group, asking this question. And I got a lot of answers. I'm asking it in quite a broad sense. You know, in the act of learning or developing or operating workloads on the AWS platform, what are the points of friction? You know, what stops you from being as good as you can be on the platform? And I'm pretty sure, adopting that definition, I could take the answers to this question from pretty much anyone in this room, one, maybe two people, and we could fill this session. The initial version ran a lot longer than the 30 minutes we've got today. So in adapting this content, we've taken sort of migrated from a more technical view around a set of points and precisely how you might go about dealing with them, to a more sort of reflective approach as to how we deal with problems on this platform in general. So let's take a few minutes to consider that. The term pain points has a potentially negative connotation to it. Today's presentation is not a roast, right? We're all part of a user community here. We know that the benefits of this platform far outweigh the challenges that we have when we're trying to adopt it. So if there's criticism here, it's only for the purposes of trying to improve our approach to using the platform, trying to have a role in improving the platform. So let's get to our first pain point. No unlimited use plan. This was one of the first answers we received in the survey. It's not entirely serious, of course, so we'll take that as a comment and move on. However, this next pain point, I had to summarise from many. There's a function for it. Service X won't do this thing that I want it to do, whatever it happens to be, some function. I can't migrate cognito user tools. I can't roll back a pipeline, an AWS code pipeline, etc., etc., etc. There was many tens of these in responses that I've had today. The point is, every service has functional limitations, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Many services, many, not all, have capacity limitations. Some of these are hard capacity limitations. The number of IP6 cyber blocks in a VPC, I believe that's a pretty hard limit. The number of VPCs we can run in an account has been set at some sensible default, but is malleable. The point is, limitations are not necessarily the same as problems. Functional gaps are functional gaps. That might be an issue for your particular use case, but it's not a bug, it's not a fail. So in the next few slides, we'll have a talk about how we approach these. What are our strategies for dealing with our pain points? The first is kind of obvious, but you might not be fully aware of the various dimensions that you have available to you. Ask your community. When faced with an issue, you'll all sympathise with that process of banging your head against the wall. It's very easy to get tunnel vision when faced with a problem or a constraint. And it was really interesting in the first version of this presentation. There were quite a number of almost showstopper issues for people in our user group meeting that were solved during the presentation through discussion of a couple of pain points and their features. So one of them that I do recall was a fellow that had some kind of arcane key rotation requirement on his Bastion service. It was preventing him from accessing his server infrastructure, and simple introduction to systems manager, session manager set him right. That was all he needed. Another several pain points were various tool sets, things like serverless framework, which wouldn't support SSO credentials. So AWS SSO, now Identity Center, has this particular habit of storing credentials in locally in your CLI in a different place than if you were logging in using standard IAM credentials. And there's a simple utility. Your SSO, there's a couple of other very similar ones, which if you run them as part of your build process, just simply copy the credentials from the SSO location to the standard location, and it gets around this limitation with some of our tool sets. So the point is, take the time to engage your community. There are AWS service partners. There are, of course, AWS themselves and former solution architects, and partner managers, and account managers. There's your user groups. And then there's also sort of special communities like AWS ambassadors and heroes, what have you. Just dealing with it is also a strategy. Is the effort to get around the limitation that you're facing more effort than it's worth? And what's the opportunity cost of your time? Is there something of more high value that you could be working on? This is perhaps a special case of this strategy. Waiting. Nobody likes to wait, but there can be reasons for it. AWS favours putting services in the hands of users as soon as possible. This means services go from preview to general availability before they might be ready for production. But there's no definition of feature complete that I'm aware of in these services, and your definition of production is different to mine. We work in different industries, sectors, what have you. Services evolve. Some faster than others, but they do, and they will perhaps evolve in your direction. I think of an example here, AWS Glue, which I've been mentioned several times today. Serverless managed implementation of Apache Spark with a bunch of nice tools for distributed data processing. It's a fantastic service, but it did have some some limitations when it was released. I recall determinism. You would initiate a job, but you would never guarantee when it would start, and it could take many minutes to do so. It made the development round-tripping time quite challenging. I believe there's been a lot of movement in that space. Similarly, there were a bunch of features. I've given presentations on that service several times over the years, and every time I do it, it requires a substantial revision. Perhaps AppSync is a service on a similar trajectory. It doesn't currently implement the GraphQL specification. Some developers that come to it sort of expect that it might. Perhaps it will. Maybe we need to wait. Workaround, okay, yes, that's a strategy for handling pain points. We're pretty familiar with that one. It's not particularly reusable. It only works in certain circumstances, specific workarounds for specific circumstances. Switching your service is a strategy worth considering, particularly if you're working with functions in certain areas. So if you consider the number of services we have available for messaging, SQS, SNS, Amazon MQ, IoT message broker for our MQTT messages, EventBridge even. How many ways can we host a container? ECS, or EKS, Lightsail, so even ways of doing it in SageMaker. We've got options available to us. So perhaps our pain point has got something to do with not picking the right service for the job. Well, the right service for the job right now. The next strategy is simple. I know we've got a variety of people here today, like some people that I presume are subject matter experts, some people that are perhaps new to the platform. So I may be telling some of you how to suck eggs here, but when we hit a capacity constraint with some of our services, as I said, some of those limits are valuable. They can be, you can request an increase to them. All you need to do is go to the support centre, create a case, and there's an option when you create a support case to request a service quota increase. You're not guaranteed that it will be honoured, but you won't get it if you don't ask. Similarly, use your support plan. Again, when we're banging our head against a wall, not resolving an issue, it's easy to just dig that hole a little bit deeper. But consider here parallelizing your effort. If you've spent a little while on this issue and you're not getting too far, perhaps you just need to raise a case. And if you solve it in the meantime, you can close that case before anybody looks at it. But if you find yourself 24, 48, 72 hours down the track and you haven't managed to help yourself, perhaps this will help get you there. Similarly, feature requests. Through our console, there's a little link down at the bottom left there. Perhaps one of those things that we don't often see. There's a lot of us spend a lot of time in this console, but I guarantee you there are features in here that you don't use because you just pass over them every day. Just out of interest, at the top there's a little console icon that opens Cloud Shell. It's surprising how many people don't know that there's a shell in the console. Similarly, there's a feedback link. So if you don't have a feature that you need to get your job done, try raising a request for that feature. Perhaps somebody already has, in which case you have an opportunity to upvote that feature. The AWS product teams all have roadmaps, feature roadmaps for their services. And they're a customer-obsessed company. So a prime input to that roadmap is what customers like you need. And this is how you get your voice heard. Similarly, AWS partners and account managers, solution architects, any of these people you know, will typically be very supportive of facilitating this process. And you might even find yourself with a direct line to the product teams. I've seen that happen more than once. So the last few pain points, strategies for dealing with pain points rather, perhaps not particularly revolutionary. The last couple take a little more thinking. So consider evolving your architecture. One of the key gaps I see in architecture definitions anywhere is time. You think about scope and data and tech, infrastructure, but architecture exists in time, and it can be different as time progresses. Your architecture can be time sensitive. Scaling is a simple, common, time-based requirement for your architectures. Implementing a scaling strategy is not always a linear extension of the services that you're currently on. It may require you to redesign or migrate some of your services. And I'll bring up Blue again as an example here. Brilliant service. Manage Spark with some excellent tools for dealing with data at scale. And you pay by the job. So if you're developing proofs of concept or you're using relatively infrequent jobs, it's going to be your friend. But if you find yourself dealing with data at significant scale, like any serverless service, you will be paying a premium for that information. You initially get the benefit, of course, you want to pay that premium because you're not having to pay any overheads and you're not having to pay for when you're not using them. But when you do have a high volume use case and you can predict your workload, you may find there's alternatives. In this case, maybe setting up your own high performance compute cluster for EMR with or without Spark implementation might be appropriate. Ultimately, you need to check your perspective. Services are limited by their nature, by definition. It is how AWS removes that undifferentiated heavy lifting. You do the same thing when you're prioritising which functions to implement in your workloads. It's a value function. So, if you want the differentiated heavy lifting, if you need some differentiated heavy lifting because of your particular use case, you may need to customise. But I've said here, customise with extreme prejudice. You must selectively customise. Our services exist on a continuum. From our platform services to our infrastructure services. Even the platform services have are on this continuum from highly managed serverless services through to managed but less managed services, like RDS. Sometimes your requirements are simply too specific to be supported on those platform services, and you may need to move down that continuum to craft a service to your particular requirement. It's going to come with additional time and cost and operational overhead, but that might be the price you need to pay. The best illustration of this that I've seen was given by ex-AWS VP Adrian Cockcroft. They had an excellent set of presentations on modern applications development. And so he illustrated this selective customisation approach by saying that we deal with our customers, we determine what they want, we design them a solution that looks a bit like this. But crafting this to the nth degree is not sustainable. Certainly not in the first instance, because we know we're not going to get it right. So we use some composable blocks. We use our services. They're not functionally complete, they don't have nice smooth edges, but they're very useful because when we know we get something wrong, we can pull a piece out and put another piece back in. But when we do find that constraint, the requirement that is absolutely needed but can't be satisfied through a platform service, then we can roll that with a lower order service. Okay, so we've spoken about strategies for dealing with some of these pain points. Let's get back onto the issue of what some of these pain points are. There's an elephant in the room. We can't talk about pain points without bringing this one up. Take a moment to think. Here we go. Managed NAT gateway. To run a VPC, you need subnets, route tables, gateways, elastic IPs, and security groups, and they're all free of charge. To access resources outside of your private subnets, you must traverse a NAT gateway on a per availability zone basis. And AWS have a service for that, managed NAT gateway. It's very dependable, it's mature, it's time-tested, true, it's brilliant, but depending on your circumstance, you may find that the pricing there is a bit heavy-handed. You pay for every uptime hour, you must have multiple of these things, you pay for data in or out, depending on where it comes from or where it's going, and so there's quite a few things. If you're a large enterprise, perhaps this cost pales into insignificance. For certain workloads, and for an example here, I might think, I've worked with clients on globally delivered applications with AWS bills in the hundreds of dollars a month, because they're serverless apps, and they're highly efficient from a cost point of view. It only takes one network addressable resource to require us to spin up a VPC. And that then sort of has a snowball effect here. This, if we had some more time, we could use this as a great case study for walking through those strategies that we talked about before. We might see if we could ditch this VPC, go fully serverless, but we know it only takes that one resource to send us down the rabbit hole. We could look at gateway endpoints that can eliminate the need, perhaps, for the NAT gateway, but they only work for certain AWS services. We could look at interface endpoints, which give us access within our VPCs to a much broader set of AWS services, but it only takes a certain number of those before we are back at the managed NAT gateway cost. I think it's in the order of 6 or 7 VPC. As I said, we could apply those strategies, unfortunately, it's not. Just for the last couple of minutes, I just want to walk through not specific pain points, but the key categories of pain points that came through, almost in a sort of rough order. To date, we have been discussing them in a rough order of priority from the wider community. Learning really was up there, and in particular, learning overload. There's so much to learn on this platform, so much collateral. My advice is to focus on core service knowledge. I interviewed a number of really senior AWS practitioners, including several AWS ambassadors. And I asked them the question, what's the one thing, if you had your time again to learn on this platform, that you would do? I said, they go back and read the IAM manual. Understanding the access control the core access control service would have given them, would have removed a set of barriers that they had to producing workloads, and it would have given them a more fundamental understanding of how the platform hangs together. So this is a great example where a focus on some core services, such as IAM and S3, stand you in good stead. Plus the services that you know you're going to use. The IoT services are useful, but if you're not working in IoT, perhaps it's not a great place to start. Another piece of advice would be to use certification to challenge yourself to learn in sort of high velocity increments. There's nothing like studying for an exam to sort of motivate you. I've got about 7 days to get my Solution Architect Pro redone before it expires. But you must take the time to apply some of this knowledge between those increments. Bagging certifications, I would argue, doesn't necessarily get you to where you need to go. Drinking from the service and feature tracking via. So there's any number of sources out there that are going to send you a steady stream of new feature announcements. It's often too much to take in. So again, subscribe to a good summary. The AWS blog is not a bad one. Corey Quinn's last week in AWS is not a bad one. And don't try to be over everything all the time. Pick your service space and then take a holiday and jump outside of it when you've got some time. Last point, this is just a little bugbear of mine and some of the members of the Perth AWS community. The AWS exams are not very accessible. People that have some reading difficulties and sensory issues struggle to take these exams. So if you ever do get an opportunity to advocate, as we were talking before, feature requests and custom feedback, please upvote us on this one. Cost management. Also a very large class of issue. The lack of price caps came up again and again and again in this research. The complexity of the pricing model. I have had some clients of mine argue that the pricing model is opaque. I argue the opposite. It's absolutely transparent. Doesn't mean it's not complex, and I think that's where they're going. So estimating and forecasting your cost for any kind of complex workload for which you don't have a strong demand profile or an accurate demand profile is prone to error. And you're in the cloud, so this pay-as-you-go kind of model comes with a flip side, what I call it a lack of cost determinism. Even if you have got a great handle on the key drivers of your cost, you still can't, if you've got any kind of randomness in your load profile, necessarily pinpoint precisely how much you're going to pay at the end of the month. And for some people, they may be prepared to pay more for the determinism, in which case the infrastructure services are where they should go. There has been some recent movement in this space. The one-click templates for AWS budgets. It's not that it has been impossible to do this, it's just that the services haven't made it front and centre, haven't made it easy for users, particularly new users, to set themselves some limits. And I think we've definitely seen some improvements in this space. Yes, there was a whole series of DevSecOps related issues, which we don't have time to go through. And likewise, there was a whole series of development related pain points, which again, we don't have time to go. And indeed, as a partner, there's a number. But that's, we've hit our time. So thank you very much for listening. Catch up with me on these. These are a couple of Singapore slings that I made on Christmas Day. So thank you very much.